Hey guys, welcome to another Warrior1Spine episode. We're going to be actually diving into some pretty cool stuff actually we always do. Dr. Pascal always brings the goods. I'm going to do a little bit of an intro, and it's going to be a little bit different intro because usually I use a lot of pre and post X-rays and share a lot of stories. What I'm going to do is share the most important story that we all have to really get or even remember within our practices. So let's get started.
So this is how the great career starts off. I'm in school. I actually done very, very well in school. And I'm a teacher's assistant. I'm one of the heads of student clinic. And I think everything is going great, as planned. And the president closes the whole event off by his final words to the graduating class is, remember this, as you go out into the world, always remember that the first adjustment restored hearing. But what really got me, just rocked my world, is that I didn't think that he believed it. And I wish he would have told me sooner, because that really rocked me. A few months later, I'm in front of my first patient, and this man sat down. He came in with a big power suit. He had pinstripe black suit, beautiful tie, big old fat Rolex on. I go into my chiropractic spiel, and he just puts his hand up. He says, I just need to know one thing from you. He opens up his pinstripe jacket and takes a bottle of pills out, and he said, I just came back from the doctor, and that I'm in so much pain right now, and I'm so depressed that the doctor says that I need to take these. And he says, so doctor, it's either I take these or I'm gonna go home today and commit suicide. And all he wanted to know at that point is, doctor, can you help me? In my heart, I really wanted to say, yes, I can help you. But I didn't. And at that moment, I realized that not only didn't I know what chiropractic was, but I realized that I didn't know who I was. And so when people ask me what Warrior is all about, I really look back to that moment as a defining moment, as, truly finding out who God's called you to be, and truly finding your identity in Him. And out of that, everything flows from above down, inside out. And I believe that right now, if you're watching this, and if you know that there's more, I believe you need to be a warrior. My name is Ed Quirk, and I am Warrior.
So that was my first patient, and just a moment ago, and actually is about 28, 29 years ago. So we all didn't start off with a bang, but that was a defining moment for me. And after that, I had a deep dive into my why, and I had a deep dive into getting better at my how. And shortly after that, about a year, within a year, because I was an associate in that clinic. I had done my internship there, and about a year after I met Yuri, and we decided to partner up. And I was at zero about a year and a half after that first patient. I'm starting off partnering with Yuri, and I went from 0 to 1,000 a week in less than 2 years. And the clinic, Yuri and I went from 2,000 a week in 2000 in 2 years. And because we just got lost in our why, lost in a good way. And since then, 2000 and 2000, having one of the largest clinics, one of the busiest clinics in Canada. And not only that, from there we went on to coaching, and we've coached most of the biggest clinics and most of the most successful chiropractors and most influential chiropractors in the country. And there's a common theme and a common thread to the stories. And I'm going to share just the most principled way to do your story within your practice. So there's a character, there's a hero. The hero is not the doctor. The hero can't be the doctor. The hero is the patient, the person who will take their journey. The hero must do a task outside of their comfort zone, but necessary for their survival and benefit to others. The hero is not the strongest nor the most reliable character in the story. It is the guide. So the doctor is the guide. The hero is in the center of the story because the hero has to take action. The hero has a problem. The story questions are: will the hero get out of the problem? How bad will the damage be if they don't? Will there be a happy ending? Awesome stories deposit a series of questions that make an audience stick around. The hero, the patient, meets a guide, the principal doctor, who understands their fear. Characters don't solve their own problems. They meet someone who guides them. As a good guide, you've been there and done that. They understand the journey the character is on and can clearly see where they need to go. So the first job of the guide is to listen, to understand and to empathize with the hero's problem. And the second job of the guide, give the hero a plan they can use to fight for a happy ending. Those are your two major jobs in your process of the story. The guide, not the hero, is the strongest and most steady character in the story. The guide gives them a plan. When the hero meets the guide, they are confused. The job of the guide is to break through the hero's confusion and give them a confidence in that their life can be better. After the hero hears the plan, they must decide whether to take action on the plan they've been given. That calls them to action. A call to action is a point at which the hero must decide to act on the plan. They must choose whether to stay in their comfort zone or embrace the plan given to them by the guide. That plan is going to result in success if it's followed. An audience must know that what might happen if they are going to remain interested. We must know that the hero can get the boy, girl, disarm the bomb, or die trying, win or lose for a better life. Or failure. An audience must have a clear idea of what possible failure faces the hero if they don't act on the plan. If people don't know what failure might befall the hero, audiences zone out and lose interest. So that's the most principled storyboard that you have to keep at the forefront of what you do, how you do it, and why you do it. Most chiropractic messaging starts with what from the outside in. So that's what I was doing during my first patient interaction. I was showing up, trying to make them believe in chiropractic, trying to sell chiropractic. Most chiropractors will try to prove and convince about chiropractic. Purpose-driven docs have nothing to lose, nothing to prove, and nobody to convince. They lead with their why and communicate the solution via the how. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Let me say that again. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And so the hero, the patient, has to interact with their belief system throughout the process of your story. They're coming in with a lot of pain and loss now, and they want pleasure now. And they're seeking somebody to try to give them pleasure now. But how many other professionals are trying to provide pleasure now? How many massage therapists, kinesiologists, how many Reiki masters, How many people are just focused on trying to alleviate some pain? Well, if you're just trying to alleviate pain, it's the lowest survival response you'll get. It's a small problem, then you get a small solution. It's least commitment, so it's easy to get them to start, but they'll never finish anywhere. This small investment, small return, low belief, low transformation, low vision, they're going to end up where they were already headed anyways, but maybe with a little bit less pain. So as principal doctors, we have to have them interact where they are now, what pain do they have, what pain have they had, what loss are they going through, and they have to be able to start seeing some pleasure in the future. The vision response they can start seeing the future. They see a bigger problem. They understand how they got there because you tell them the story of how they got there and why they need a bigger solution in terms of reconstruction. It's going to bring more commitment. It might bring a little bit more pushback, but very, very seldom. If there's more pushback, it's just like you don't have to try to convince them. Just let it go. It is a bigger investment, but it'll give them a bigger return. And I know for a fact that most people have to interact with pleasure future, but they also have to interact with pain and loss future, because if the choice is no, if we're not going to follow through with reconstruction, there is a pain and loss in the future that's coming. This will bring you into high belief and high transformation. They are going to go to a place they would never get without you as their guide. And so what we have to understand, okay, the loss of cervical curve, structural damage leads to neurologic damage. When I was deep diving into my how, that was in the late 90s when you and I was starting to get deeper and deeper into Don's work and CBP, and that was just kind of, there's some other guys that were doing reconstruction too. But we went into it because we knew that the structural damage leads to neurologic damage. But even with my first patient, okay, there's way more damage happening than just the structural damage leads to neurologic damage. That damage that is happening to him physically is invading his soul. It's invading his mind. It's invading his emotions. It's changing his whole belief system. And he just wanted to he asked me, can I help him? Right? So you have to go way beyond the why. The why is not just structural. The why is not just neurologic. The why is you're invading their belief system to try to transform them from the inside out. Because what happens is, this is Tony. Okay, it just so happens Tony, I'm doing he's going into his 4th year tomorrow. But this is Tony before, right? So this is Tony before, coming in with neck, arm, headaches, migraines, and diagnosed with disc bulge 5-6. And so this is what Tony, so there's structural damage that's leading to spinal cord damage, right? But we have to understand, it has to be real for the doctor that if Tony's a phase 2, this is just going one way. It's going to get worse. Advanced phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, more stenosis, more disconnection from brain to body, more devastating structural damage, neurologic damage, but more soul damage, right? More soul damage. And that's not if it's going to go that way. It's going that way, right? The only if is, are we going to change the story, Tony? Because we can still change the story. And after 6 months, this is him after the story, his story has completely transformed. So you have to understand, beyond the physical pain, the immediate physical pain, there's an underlying soul pain. There's an underlying belief system pain. And you have to know where they've been, know where they are, know where they're going to go, and have empathy for that, and have empathy that you walk them through that journey to a place they would never get without you. See, the goal is not to do business with everybody who needs what you have. The goal is to do business with people who believe what you believe. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. If you talk about what you believe, you will attract those who believe what you believe. Like attracts like. Belief attracts belief. I have never been able to help anyone who didn't believe. inside out. Belief drives behavior. You must invade their belief center with your belief. And so what happens is we have the golden circle, right? That's you. You've got your why and you got your how. That's your sweet spot. Your why is the driving force, and the how, the purpose, your why, your motives, what you believe, okay? The specific process, the specific actions of how you're going to get the why that we're going after, okay? And along the way, they have to connect with their own why. And if they connect with their why that they're there, they're going to follow through with the how. So you take the why and the how in you, and you invade their limbic brain, which is their trust center. That's what controls behavior and decision making. They don't follow chiropractic. They don't follow all the stats. They don't follow the numbers and the stats and all that stuff. Okay, that's all good stuff. We need that stuff. But I'm just saying they follow the why and the how. You invade their belief center with the why and the how. And in order to be able to invade their soul through empathy and guide them, you have to focus on less. The biggest, most influential clinics in the world have been able to focus on less, focus on the common thread of the story. The common thread of the story helps a struggling reader focus on less, yet at the same time focus on something really important that will lead them through their story. So you focus on less, but as you're focusing on less, you're able to get them to focus on the most important things. And you know what that leads to? That leads to signs, miracles, and wonders that are going to follow you. This is part of the why of what we do, right, guys? The stories of transformation. But all these stories of transformation initially started with, I just want to get out of pain. But you bring them through a principled storytelling process to actually go gain the territory that we need to go get. So continue to focus on your why, get better at your how. Let the signs, miracles, and wonders follow you as you get closer to your belief. That's all I had, Pascal.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Ed. So let's see if I can share my screen, and let's jump into, well, probably a combination of the why and the how. Hopefully you're doing reconstructions of the spine because of your why and why you're doing this, why you believe in this. And then today we're going to talk about the details of, well, how do we apply this in clinical practice, right? So I love this. We had a request from one of the Warrior docs to do spondylolisthesis of the lumbar spine. And I was really happy to get this topic because I felt like it tied in so perfectly to what we talked about last time. So last time we talked about all the ligament instabilities of the cervical spine. And one of those ligamentous instabilities is spondylolisthesis. So this ties in very well to the lumbar spine. Realistically, the lumbar spine, this is probably the most common form of instability that we're going to see down there in the lumbar spine. So what is a spondylolisthesis? I think we all know what it is back from school, but in case we forget or we're unfamiliar with what a spondylolisthesis is, it's a condition involving spine instability, which means the vertebrae move more than they should, period. Right? Specifically in spondylolisthesis, we're referring to one vertebrae moving or slipping out of place on the vertebrae below. So if we look here, right, this is probably the classic one we're thinking of right here. Sorry, where's my mouse? There we go. We're looking at S1. If I take the back of S1 and I measure to the back of my L5, that slippage is referred to as spondylolisthesis. If you remember from my last talk, we had measured and we talked about kind of the thresholds of what's normal, what's acceptable. Anything really under 2 millimeters would be considered stable. We're not terribly concerned about it in terms of instability. However, it still falls into the category of a subluxation. So any slippage, any movement when we're comparing the back of one vertebrae to another is considered a subluxation. If we get into that 2 to 3.5 millimeter range, we're now getting into the realm of instability. And if we're over 3.5 mils, we are clinically unstable. Okay. So remember those values, because when you're measuring this stuff, it's important to be able to communicate this to your patients. And it's important for you to understand what you're dealing with, right? We might address a lumbar spondylo of 1.5 millimeters significantly different than one that's 4.5 millimeters because of how unstable it might be and what it's doing to the spinal cord, the nerves, and so on and so forth. So we also have to realize that there are different kinds of spondylos, right? We have anterolisthesis and we have a retrolisthesis. And I will tell you, as a practitioner, as a chiropractor, I want to see these guys all day long. I don't like seeing these ones nearly as much. These ones are way harder to deal with. Your anterolisthesis is significantly more problematic to try and correct than your retrolistheses. So, there are a number of reasons. We'll try and dig in and touch on some of those reasons as to why the antero is more problematic. But here's a classic, the challenging ones to correct. When you see one level only, so one spondylo, like here we see L5 slipping over S1, that slippage where there's no other, significant instability or other levels of spondylo in the spine are your most challenging ones. So here's your basic antero, okay? Here's your what you're going to see more commonly with your retros. Your retros are a lot more associated with degenerative damage, degenerative collapse. And here's kind of the classic situation. I mean, we see degenerative, it's pretty significant, degenerative disc breakdown here. We see it again, some degenerative disc breakdown. And what do you notice? We've got about a 5 mm retrolisthesis there, right? Another one where you see some breakdown, it's almost kissing the disc here. We got about a 3.5, 4 mm retrolisthesis there. You could even argue there's a little bit at the 2-1 level, and there's even a little bit here at 5S1. So these multiple level degenerative retrolistheses are the easiest and the most likely ones we're going to get correction with when we're doing our protocols of exercise adjustments and traction. Then you have your combos like this. And usually your combos are the ones that are going to have deep curves. So here we have like, I think this was around 11 mm of retro. You probably have 6 or 7 mm of retro, 2 or 3 mm of retro, and then an antero. I find that these ones are easier to get correction with your anterolisthesis when it's combined with multiple levels of retro, because oftentimes if you notice, if I was to take a posture picture on this person, they're collapsed, they're weak, their posture is being like collapsed down. And so part of the secret with these ones is actually getting them to elongate, making them stronger, engaging their core. It helps significantly in these cases where you're having a combination of retros and anteros, okay? So we have our basic anterolisthesis, we have our retrolisthesis, and then we have our combos of the two. It's very important that we're specific when we talk about these. So the question becomes, well, doc, can we actually correct these? And the answer is, yeah, we can correct these. They're not easy, they take work, but they're correctable. And it's not going to be like you follow the formula. They're not all going to correct. And I'll show you a couple of cases later on that they just don't correct the way you think they are sometimes. But if we apply the process, if we apply the how on a systematic basis, we can get some nice results. Okay. So I've used this author before a number of times in some of the studies that I've showed you. Dr. Curtis Fedorchuk, fellow Canadian chiropractor who went to Life University and decided to stay in Georgia. So he practices down there, and him and his partner, Douglas Lightstone, in practice, they do just awesome work in terms of moving our profession forward for rehabilitative care. So Dr. Curtis Fedorchuk is the master of correcting spondylolisthesis. He's actually teaching now, when Deed does his hands-on workshops, Dr. Curtis does a specific section on how to correct spondylolisthesis in your office. So if anybody is truly serious about doing this kind of work in their office, I would highly recommend going to that CBP headquarters in Eagle, Idaho, go do the hands-on that typically happens in February, and sit there with Dr. Curtis Fedorchuk and have him show you how he does these over and over, because it is truly an impressive system that he's developed to correct these. Okay, so here we go. So here's a perfect example. As I was telling you guys, these ones, it's an L3 retro with an L4 antero. Right, so what did they do? Chiropractic biophysics. So you've got your mirror image adjustments, you've got your corrective exercises, and you have your extension traction, right? So after 3 months, full correction of the L3 retrolisthesis, and then after 7 months, full correction of the L4 anterolisthesis. So that falls in line with what I just told you guys, that the retros are easier to correct than the antero. The antero took an extra 4 months to get corrected compared to the retrolisthesis, okay? So then the cool thing with this one is they had a follow-up of 1.57 years later, there was full maintenance of the correction of the retrolisthesis, right? And I believe this one was like they did 50 adjustments, I believe, over time. There was somewhere in this paper they were talking about how often they saw the patient, and it was 50 sessions over 7 months to get this corrected, okay? All right, here's another one. So reduction of 3 levels of lumbar degenerative spondylolisthesis. And so again, degenerative spondylolisthesis, the ones that have multiple levels of degeneration are always going to be your easiest ones to fix. And this was on a 63-year-old female patient. Okay, same authors doing the same exact things. Here's another one they recently did. And this one's really cool because this is one of those more challenging ones where it's just a single anterolisthesis. So this is a pretty cool paper, correction of a grade 2 spondylolisthesis. Where is it published? Not in a chiropractic journal, in radiological case case representations. So you've got following a non-surgical structural spinal rehabilitation using the same protocols: exercise, adjustments, and traction. And this one's pretty darn cool because they went from 13.3 millimeter anterolisthesis of L4/5. They got that down to 2.4, right? That's pretty cool. So 60 sessions over 45 weeks, and they've got that antero down to 13.3 to 2.4. That is pretty darn cool, right? And that's getting to be close to within our normal limits. So what is the secret sauce? Well, what are they doing? So this is the table that you want to have if you're going to be doing a lot of anterolisthesis or retrolisthesis work. Okay, this is called the Roberto table. And it's a really unique table because you see it here as the table is lying flat. Okay, so that table is very unique because number one is the harness goes onto the patient. So you got a little harness here. You can put the harness onto the patient and you can start by decompressing them. Then as you lay them down onto this table is on pistons. And so the table here, you can see it can flex up, it can flex down, it can be spread apart. This whole piece can elevate, this whole piece can drop. And so what's very unique about this table is that you can do the customized setups for those different spondylolistheses, right? And so if you want to be very specific, this is what you're going to need to do in office if you want to have consistent results in correcting spondylos. Otherwise, you will not have consistent results. The other thing that is key with spondylos is you have to x-ray them in traction to know that you're actually making a difference. And so I kid you not, Dr. Curtis put his table on wheels. They bought this $10,000 Roberto table. They fastened some wheels to it because they wheel it into their x-ray room. And here is his x-ray bucky. He will x-ray every single patient 3, 4, 5 times in their different setups to see how and or what and how the spine is responding to their spondylotraction setup, right? So once they nail it, boom, they take a picture of the patient in traction and then they recreate it. So it's pretty involved to try and correct those anteros especially. You need to take time and you need to have some specific traction setups to pull on those anteros, okay? So like I said here in my notes, traction should ideally have an axial decompression. In other words, pulling the lower half apart and pulling the upper half apart. My experience is, and Dr. Curtis as well says it, when you have that decompression, you get the absolute best results, okay? So here are some of those cases I showed you, those papers. Here are some of the pre-posts on Dr. Curtis's cases. So you got X-ray 1 values, you have X-ray 2 values. Here's X-ray 1, here's X-ray 2. Okay, so just visually looking at it, you go, wow, that's quite a bit better. It's not perfect. Again, what's the hardest thing to fix? That antero still sitting there. But if you look at that whopping 11 millimeter, was it 11 millimeters at L2 or L1-2? It's now down to 2.6. Amazing. 7.0 down to 3.4. 4.9 down to 3.0, and then even the antero, it's still a pretty substantial change, 10.2 down to 4.6. So again, it's not perfect, and don't expect perfect because we're trying to improve these spines that have been broken down and people have been neglecting them for years. And you're talking about a degenerated spine with instability. If you're getting corrections, even a millimeter, 2 millimeters, those are fantastic results when we're talking about lumbar spondylolisthesis, okay? All right, so here's a case that I did in my office. I do not have one of those Roberto tables. They're big, they take up a lot of space, and they take time for people to get set up on. But I use the Deneroll table in office, which is smaller, efficient, and you can do very simple setups with them. It works well. It doesn't work as well as the Roberto table, but we can still manage some of the same things. So here's a case that I've had in my office now. I've been working with her for just over 4 years. So here is her initial x-ray in 2020. Okay, so she's got a spondylo. That spondylo measured exactly 10 millimeters. And this is one of those tough cases where, you know, the rest of the discs, oh, there's a little bit of arthritic degeneration and damage there, but nothing else seems too out of whack. Her curve, 37 next to 40. So she's got a decent curve. She's got that spondylo right here, but she's the kind of person where like the ambulance has to come and get her at home 2-3 times a year. Why? Because as soon as that spondylo slips a little bit, she has a tweak in there. She's getting searing leg pain. She's got like unbearable pain where she can't get up, she can't sleep, she can't even get off the floor. The ambulance is coming to pick her up from her home to literally, you know, sit her down on the couch or help her get into bed. So this is some pretty debilitating spinal damage in this case, right? The other thing I want you to notice, I think, is so important with all spondylos is how far deviated the posture is. Because as I mentioned, these babies are hard to change. So even if I can't change that 10 millimeters there, I'm hoping that everybody here sees that this gap between, we'll say T12 and my sacrum, or between my red and green lines, this is a massive problem. And if there's nothing else that I can do, if I can retrain the spine to be back here, even if I don't change the spondylo, have I improved the structure of the spine? The answer is yes. And from all of the work that we've done together, if you improve the structure of the spine, do you improve the stability? Yes. Okay, so that's one of our key goals with spondylos is decrease any translation that you see, because spondylos are a result of transitional shear forces or translational shear forces. In other words, her body weight, if it's 52 millimeters forward here, all of that weight of her body is shearing, translating the spine forward, doing what to this L5 spondylo? It's wanting to drive it forward. Okay, so one of the key things is look at any other postural distortion, decrease them all. Improve the neck curve, improve forward head posture, improve shoulder tilt, shoulder lean. All of it will take stress off of the base of the spine. Okay. So here again, my office, if I'm going to work with these, I stress x-ray them. And here you can actually see this one was supine. So she's on her back on my dental roll table. You can actually see my metal buckles here. We're cranking on it. I want to see, can I move this thing? Because if I'm going to pull on a patient on my table, I want to see if I can move it. The x-rays never come out as well because you got straps and all kinds of other things covering the patient, but I can see enough. I can see that I reduced that down to like 2 or 3 millimeters. You can see my strap physically kind of like pulling on the front of the spine here, trying to drive it down this way, right? And then I look at her on her stomach. I did a stress x-ray on her stomach where we actually pull straps pulling down here, trying to drive the sacrum down. And this one goes down even better. You can see L5 goes over S1 almost perfectly. So I know that there is a legitimate possibility that we can reduce this, right? And here she is 2020, and this was later in 2020 already. So look at our gap here. Our gap goes from 52 mils down to 20 mils here about 6 or 7 months later, right? Look at that spondylo. It went from 10 millimeters down to 5 millimeters. I'm thinking, yeah, here goes my ego. I'm king, yay, right? But of course, these are super hard to maintain. And over time, it starts to slip back if you stop doing the right things. We talked about the hero in the story in Ed's intro. The hero in the story really is the patient continuing to maintain, continuing to do their adjustments, do their traction, do their exercises. Because if they're not willing to put in the work, I promise you, even if you get any correction in these, if they stop doing what got them there, these babies will almost always regress because they are unstable. And so for her, the good thing is since we've been doing this, and here's her follow-up just the other day, this is 4 months later. So we've gained some spondylo again, right? It's slipped. It's not quite 10 millimeters, but it's back to like 7 or 8. So it's not nearly as good as we were after doing traction 3 times a week and adjustments 3 times a week and so on and so forth. But she's maintained that smaller gap. She's at 18 mils. She hasn't had any debilitating episodes where like the ambulance is coming to her house for the past 3 years. Her quality of life is radically better. Her functionality is better. Everything is better. Yes, does she still get, some discomfort in her back? And if she does too much, can it still bother her? Of course. There's still an instability here that we can't completely take away. But have we made a positive impact on her life? 100%. Okay. And so these are the kinds of tractions that I do with my patients for those anterospondylos. If you have a dental roll table, these take up a very small footprint in your office. It doesn't take much space in your office, and you could be creative, right? Like I added these things I got at Princess Auto here for basically storage in a garage. I just bolted them onto my wall and I put some pulleys onto my wall. And now I bought different parachute harnesses and I literally pull my patient to the wall to decompress them. I put a strap here at the front of L4 and I pulled down on L4. I pulled back on the sacrum and S1 to try and decompress the patient. So they're all different kinds of things. You can get creative, The bottom line is you got to know where you're pushing and where you're pulling. Okay. So here's some different options too. I mean, again, sometimes people don't have axial distraction in their office if they're using dental roll tables. These work well, not as well as when you can decompress the patient, right? But I've also set these patients up prone. So I set them up on their stomach, you pull a strap this way, you pull a strap down on the tailbone, and you literally just let them sit there and try and stretch that spondylo back into place, okay? The core exercises. All right, so here are some of my favorite exercises for spondylos. I'm sure you guys have all heard of Stuart McGill. He was like famous low back researcher, but he did a lot of work on stability. He was really big on looking at instabilities. One of the big things he's known for is helping patients create stabilities with exercises. And so his three favorite exercises are one, the McGill curl up. So this is, sorry, let's. So this one here, basically, as the guy was saying, you put the hands on the low back, and it's like the person is trying to do a sit-up. But more importantly than the sit-up, what they're actually trying to do is like suck their belly button down to their spine. You're trying to create basically an anterior to posterior pressure where that yellow arrow is. You're trying to suck that down, right? So it's trying to engage the muscles on the anterior part of the spine to think about it like almost like bringing the spondylo back into position, okay? So they hold it for a few seconds, no more than 10 seconds, and I have my patients repeat it 10 to 20 times depending on their capacity. Next exercise, side plank. Side plank, whether from the knees, depending on the person's ability, or side plank from the feet, again, depending on where they're at, right? Simply put, we have to work unilaterally. We have to work that spine unilaterally. A lot of spondylolisthesis, not only does it start to slip forward, it starts to create a lot of problems in the anterior to posterior plane where we start to see some lateral listhesis as well. So if you want to prevent further instability, you start strengthening the sides of the spine. So have them do those lateral isometric contractions doing a side plank. And then lastly, the cross crawl. The reason that this exercise is so important is because it teaches us to move our limbs while bracing your core, right? The reality is during daily life, you have to reach for something. You're walking, you're moving, all of these things that we're doing, you have to move limbs. So the goal with this exercise is learning to move your limbs independently while actively bracing your core, right? So that stability, the bracing, the muscular component in these cases, to me, is so unbelievably important, right? Especially those patients. If you get that correction in their spondylo, the only way it's going to stay there is if they're doing core exercises. That's not to say other core exercises don't work. They probably all work. I just love those three because one, if you anybody who goes onto YouTube and just puts in McGill Big Three, you will find tons of videos. So it's super easy for your patients. You can show them briefly in office and say, hey, go onto YouTube and check out these exercises. All right, back to my PowerPoint. Did I get us back on? Got the proper share? Cool. Thank you, Dr. Chan. I see you there. All right, so here's another case. So now let's talk about, okay, if you're not doing traction in office, can you use dinner rolls with these patients? Yes, you can, but it's tricky. I'm going to tell you if you're going to use dinner rolls, same thing, take the time, get a portable chiropractic table. You don't need a traction table. Get a small portable table or even anything that they can lie on, lay them on the unit, take a stress x-ray of them laying on the dinner roll before you send them home with it, okay? Because there are times where the lumbar dinner roll will actually reduce it a little bit, and there are also times where it might actually aggravate it more and make your anteros worse. The retrolisthesis, I'm not worried about it. If they've got like 2 or 3 levels of retrolisthesis, you lay them on the dinner roll, they feel good, high five, don't need the x-ray. If they have an anterolisthesis, I'm going to tell you, you should always take a film of them laying on the dinner roll before you send them home with it, okay? So here's one of my patients. We just started seeing her recently. She came in because she's a CrossFitter at our gym. She's complaining about her hips hurting her, and, she's going to do physio and massage and all these things. They keep looking at her hip. And long story short, of course, we're going to do some x-rays and check out the spine. And what do you notice? Well, she's got some pretty significant instability right here in her spine. She's got a 5 millimeter retro at 3.4, and then we've got a 7 millimeter antero at 4.5. And so what we ended up doing with her, this is her here actually laying in traction. This is the traction we chose to do with her, where we tried to just brace and pull up at L4. We're pulling down kind of on the sacrum just below L5, trying to stretch it down this way. But I also wanted to give her a lumbar dinner roll because I thought this is one of those cases that, one, she could handle it, and two, it would improve the lumbar curvature and try to help smooth everything out. So we give her a lumbar dinner roll, we try and layer on it. If it goes well, we jump into the x-ray room and then we take an x-ray to see, okay, well, how well does that x-ray, how well does that lumbar dinner roll correct things? But most importantly, does it prevent any aggravation of the spondylo, right? So again, I gave you the numbers. I said it was 5 millimeters here and about 7 millimeters here. Okay, so here she is, lumbar dinner roll. I got it written right there. You can actually see the peak of the lumbar dinner roll. It's pushing right in the area that I want it to push. And I look here, it's not aggravating it. Good. I measured it at 6.5 millimeters. If anything, it's actually decreasing it mildly. It's not decreasing it well, but it's not making it worse. Okay. She lays on it. She goes, oh, wow, it actually feels really good. Stretching out the back, taking pressure off the nerves. This is decreasing it by 1 millimeter. So instead of 5 millimeters, it's going down to 4 millimeters. Overall, the line, like you look at her lumbar spine, it's much closer to my template line as well. Check. Doesn't aggravate the antero, decreases my retro, improves the overall curvature. Patient feels a good stretch. High five, you're going home with the dental roll. That's simply how I do it when it comes to spondylolisthesis in the lumbar spine. Okay. Oh, and sorry, then here she was after her 3-month follow-up x-ray. And I'm showing you these because earlier I said, you know, you have to celebrate 1 or 2 millimeters. And the reality is, I'm looking at the numbers here. I wrote them down so I wouldn't forget them. So her retro goes from 5 millimeters down to 3.6. Hey, I'm happy. It's not a huge change, but for someone who's been probably dealing with this for years, and now guess what? At CrossFit, she can do all the movements she wants to do, and she's back to doing, you know, the snatches and the running and all the things that she wanted to do without any discomfort. So she has her why back, right? Why was she doing this? Not because she wants a good looking spine. Her why was, let me get back into the gym so I can keep being youthful and do the things that I love. So we go from 5 down to 3.6, and here we went from 7 down to 5.9. So not huge changes, but after 3 months, hey, I'm happy. We're continuing on. She's totally bought in. She probably won't stop coming for the rest of her life because of the changes now she is seeing in this short time frame. Okay, and here's when you have to know just to leave them alone. Okay, so here's one of those antero L5s. And sometimes I think these are the ones that are congenital, right? People are born with them. So this guy here, he's the spouse of one of the people who works in our office. So, you know, obviously we're going to check all the spouses. So we do just a full routine exam and x-rays on him. And look at this whopping spondyle that we find, 13 point something millimeters. It's massive, right? But guy's got no discomfort, no problems, pretty darn functional. Either way, we're still going to try and address it and correct this. And so we took a bunch of different stress x-rays to see, okay, what was going to be his best setup. So this setup right here is him laying here in traction. You can see the strap pulling on his stomach, and that 13 goes down to about 4 or 5. So not bad. So we've got great hopes that it's going to change. After 3 months, we do a follow-up x-ray, hardly any change. We modify his traction setup just a little bit. We keep cranking on him 6 months later, absolutely no change. 6 months later, it's still at 13 millimeters. I have no belief and no expectations that this spondyla will ever change. You know, at this point, there's no point in continuing to try and crank on this thing because it's still an instability. And so there's a risk if we're not making it any better, if we're constantly cranking on it, we don't want to make it more unstable in the long run either. Right. And these ones that are congenital, like you look at this one, you can see how his L5, if you look closely, it's almost like a lock and key model. His L5 has this crazy indentation. It's almost like it's built to like wrap around the front of his S1. And I think that's part of the reason that you can't correct some of these is because patients have had adaptation, especially if it's been there since an early age. The shape of the disc, the facets, the end plates have molded into this new position. And so it simply will not hold in a different position because of the formation of the bones and the tissues, right? So sometimes the bottom line is if you try to correct them after a few months, let it go. Make it strong, keep adjusting them, but let go of the need to have to correct the spondylo, okay? These are the slam dunk cases, the ones where, you know, this patient here, obviously this is me laying on it, but this was the setup that we had used for her. So this is that case I showed you very early on when I compared the antero to the retro. So this is one of those where you see multiple levels of degenerative disc disease, you know, multiple levels of mild retrolisthesis. Nothing crazy, but this is not a good looking happy spine whatsoever. But so these patients, the small retros, multiple levels with degeneration, the ones that have weak posture, they've got decreased lumbar curvature, right? 12 degrees, it's less than 40. Sacral base angle, 24 degrees, it should be 40. Multiple levels of, I should have put mild instability, nothing crazy there, right? Those are the cases that respond so well to just using the dental roll. So here she is after we take our 3-month follow-up x-ray. So this is the pre here, okay? And then here's her post. So quite a bit better. Not perfect, but in 3 months, I'm pretty impressed. I'm quite happy with what I see. Her curve improved by 5 degrees, right, to 17. Sacral base angle improved by 3 degrees. And look at these retros. So clinically unstable, clinically unstable, clinically unstable, right? Down to, yes, these are still probably a little bit higher than we'd like, but none of those are gross instabilities anymore. Yes, the 2.6 is still in that realm of unstable. This is still in the realm of unstable, but you know, this one's cut down by almost 50% at 3-4. This one's cut down by over 50%. So some really nice change in 3 months. So these are the ones that you really want to go after with the lumbar dental roll and exercises and adjustments, and they don't need any in-office traction at all to get great results. All right, so here are our takeaways from this spondylo talk. So ideally, these patients get in-office traction with axial decompression. I should have put when you have the L5 or L4 anteros. Those are the ones that need really in-office traction to see results with that decompression. No matter what spondylo they have, they all need stability core exercises. You know, if nothing else, just tell them to check out the McGill Big Three on YouTube. And you can use a lumbar roll, right? But if they have an anterolisthesis, my rule of thumb is you must do a stress x-ray before sending them home with it, just to make sure you're not aggravating it, okay? And I think that's all I had for you. Then, as always, there's a coupon code to thank you guys for being on these webinars and using the dental products to help move our profession in the right direction. This is where you order the products, obviously, my contact information, and the YouTube page with, you know, how-to user guides for all of the dental products. So I've got exactly 10 minutes. We can open it up to see if anybody has any questions for me.
Thanks, Pascal, once again. This is awesome.
My pleasure.
That last setup where you were the model and
Yep.
you had a large T block there.
Yes.
Like, and then that's just to like, how do you decide how thick of a thoracic block to put on a person there? I guess now that I'm looking at it a little closer, I do see it, but could you
Yeah.
go through that a little bit, your logic for going that thick?
So when you measure your lumbar x-rays, do you measure translation, Dr. Lang? Meaning, like, are you measuring the distance between T12 and L1 on a horizontal or lateral axis?
Like
Do
from
you
the
follow
green
what I'm saying?
line to the red line?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So that's what dictates how much support I'm going to give them. Okay. So if they're shifted backwards quite a ways, you know, like in this case right here, I don't have the measurements on me. Let's just say it's an inch. Well, generally I want to give them at least an inch of support, if not more. Right. And usually I will double the distance that I see. If they're shifted backwards an inch, I'm going to go an inch, but sometimes 2 inches forward because remember, you're trying to mirror image the posture. Now, the lumbar dental roll is going to do that a lot in itself. The problem is let's just say, I mean, I'm only 5'7", right? That medium dental roll, if I didn't have this support here, Dr. Lang, what's going to happen to my shoulders? They're going to crank way back here. So my lumbar spine will still be, we'll say, in anterior translation, but my thoracic spine is going to go into this crazy extension, which I don't want on most patients. I want to keep that the thoracic spine neutral. So I'll usually match the translation in the lumbar spine and or double it with a block to drive the chest forward. So if, you know, I'm just trying to improve a little bit of curve at 3-4 and there's no translation whatsoever in the lumbar spine, I would use a small lumbar dental roll and not put a block behind the shoulders. If the patient was, you know, same thing, 6'3", and they had this right here, I still wouldn't use a translation block because at 6'3", their low back could probably swallow the medium dental roll and they wouldn't have any thoracic translation. So there's kind of like this, you have to juggle that between the patient's flexibility, their height, and how far they shift backwards. And do you want to have any thoracic extension or not? So if I'm trying to limit all thoracic extension, I'll almost always use a block unless they're super tall and very flexible. If I want some thoracic extension because I find that they kind of have this posture too, okay, then I won't use that thoracic block because I want their shoulders to lean back a bit. So there's a number of things that I look at. When you talk about just lumbar dental roll, and if you're going to learn from Deed and you want to keep it black and white and simple, he will almost always tell you if you're going to use a medium lumbar dental roll, you're using 1 inch of support. So about 20 mils of support, right? Because the medium lumbar dental roll is typically going to be used in patients that have about 20 mils to an inch of posterior translation. So if nothing else, try to match the amount of support behind the rib cage to the amount of posterior translation you see in the lumbar spine.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Dr. Scott, go ahead.
Hello, this is phenomenal, Pascal. Thank you so much for this information. I really appreciate it. Just a quick question.
Yes.
The stress x-rays, when you
Yeah.
have a traditional, upright bucky, digital, how do you do the stress x-ray?
I should have took a picture of how I do it, but like literally that table that I'm laying on right here, it's got
Yeah.
2 wheels. So I just wheel this in. Like this is how I take my x-rays right here. Like I'll take an x-ray. Like imagine the bucky was behind me right here. I just take my x-ray. And then all I do is just rotate the x-ray in the software. I just turn it 90 degrees
Okay.
and read it upright. Does that make sense? So like these x-rays here, like let me go back a slide here. Where was she? like this on the lumbar dental roll. This patient is just laying on her back, kind of like me right here, right?
Okay.
Lay on your back. I take the x-ray, right? So imagine the upright bucky was behind this. And you just zap
Right.
the x-ray like that of the patient laying on their back. And then I guarantee almost every single x-ray software out there has the ability to just rotate the picture 90 degrees. And then this is
Sure.
it here. She's just on her back. And then I just rotate the picture 90 degrees. So I can read it upright or measure it upright and compare it to my neutrals.
Okay. Okay.
Does that make
I
sense?
think our errors, we put our bucky right in the corner. So in order to get a picture of the lumbar, I have to have the legs up the wall.
Yeah. Yeah. So the cervical would be easier for you. The lumbar would almost
Yeah.
be the lumbar. Then if your bucky is right against the wall, the lumbar is virtually impossible then. Yeah.
Yeah.
To get a
Okay.
good view, I mean, to get a really good view of it, it'd be hard, and unless your patient was super flexible, right?
Right.
Yeah.
All right. That's awesome. Thank you
Good.
so much.
You're welcome. Dr. Cameron, go ahead.
Hey, Dr. Pascal. My question is, when you're doing the supine blocking of L5 anteriolisthesis, why wouldn't you sacral block it at the same time to help pull down? Or would you sacral block it?
Are you talking about with a dental roll?
No, like a square, like just roll or a square block or something like that to stabilize the sacrum so you can help pull down that L5 at the same time.
Because even if you block the sacrum without any axial distraction, the L5 won't suck back on its own. You need a pretty strong force. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, can you do axial distraction at the same time that you block it and then pull down? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. You guys have a traction table in your office?
No, we don't.
Yeah, so that's the hard part. Like if you don't have that traction table, and there are some setups, I have done that in the past, where I would block the sacrum to create like a negative space for things to suck back in. But it's a bit of a different setup. I didn't put that one in there because it's a bit more complicated, but I have done that where like if they're on their back, they're supine, we block the pelvis to create a little bit of a negative gap for L5 to suck backwards. But when you take the stress x-rays, like the ones where they are supine, like if I go back to one over here, you see that like there's enough, where was she? I think it's her here. Okay, so here's one, she's supine, right? I don't even need
Yeah.
this space because it's sucked back enough. Could you? Yes.
Okay.
Could you put a block here? Absolutely. The problem is by putting a block there, if you're not trying to decrease the sacral base, you're going to flatten the sacral base at the same time, right? And so if there are cases where you're trying to flatten, in hers we were, in this actually, she is one that we had flattened it because she's 48 degrees in sacral base angle. So we had flattened her to create that, right? But if I go back to this case here, where like this lady, she's actually lacking sacral base angle. Can we see it here? 25 degrees. So in her case, I don't want to flatten that at all. Because if I flatten that, sure, it might help the L4, but is that L4 going to be any more stable if I take that sacral base angle from 25 degrees and I take that down to 15 degrees? No, you could actually argue I've just made that spine more unstable. And so the only time that I will block the sacrum is if they've got that spondylo, generally with a significant anterior translation, kind of like you saw in that one lady's case there where she's 50 millimeters forward, because not only do we need to create space for the spondylo, we need to create negative space for the spine to come backwards. So if there's spondylo, with significant anterior translation and an increased sacral base angle, then yes, by all means, I would block the pelvis to try and flatten the sacral base to create that negative space. But if you're just using dental rolls at home, I would not worry about it unless you have this increased sacral base angle.
Okay, if you were to do that, if you were to have a patient do that at home, could they block their sacrum at the same time as doing an inversion table?
Sure. Yeah.
Because that will give that axial distraction at the same time that they're doing it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and you could potentially too, like let's say they had a retro at L1 and you wanted to use the lumbar dental roll at L1. Could you put the lumbar dental roll at L1? And if they had that, increased sacral base angle, still block the sacrum? Sure, you could block the sacrum to try and just decompress L5, the antro, at least not make it any worse, and put a, small lumbar dental roll or medium lumbar dental roll higher up in the lumbar spine. Absolutely, you could do that too.
Awesome.
Good question. Dr. Yuri.
Yeah, just looking at results, if you have degenerative spondylolisthesis at L5, like anterior versus if there's a pars defect,
Yeah.
Are the results different? And is the approach any different?
And that's the hard part with it. Sometimes it's hard to tell. Is it a pars defect? Like here, I think there's a pars defect. You can kind of see like a fracture through here versus the very degenerative ones where the facets even start to go. Like if the facets can't hold it in place anymore, almost no matter what you do, they're not going to hold very well, Yuri. So you don't really know what the facets look like unless they've had an MRI. But I've got a case of a gentleman, I've been working with him for a while. We haven't had really any change in his spondylo because his facets are more or less degenerated and gone. And so there are no stability in his facets. His disc is degenerated. So those very advanced degenerative ones, I think, are potentially the most problematic to try and correct, or the congenital ones. I think the ones that have the pars fractures, there's a bit of disc slippage, but the disc isn't too far gone. Those are actually easier to correct because the disc is still fairly healthy and the ligaments around, all the other ligaments around are still good. And so if you've got like a fracture with some, mild spondylolisthesis with a healthy disc, those are easier to correct. If it's a congenital defect like this gentleman that I showed you here, like this one's a congenital defect here from birth, I'm almost positive. There's no way we're going to change it because, like I said, the tissues have changed so much down here. His L5 over S1 is like a lock and key model. So I wish I had all those answers on that, Yuri, but I don't. But my experience is congenital with like defects like that don't change well. And the ones that are severely degenerated where like the facets are gone, especially if you have an MRI, those don't seem to hold very well either.
Okay, thank you.
Pascal, just one
Yeah,
quick, okay.
Yeah.
Just brief for you. I don't know how to raise my hand, so that's why I didn't do it.
Oh,
Just with your adjusting protocol. So are you
Yeah.
doing mostly doing mostly instrument adjusting mirror image kind of thing?
It's a great question.
And contact points, and are you
I
doing
do.
dual prong?
It's funny because I think I do different things with different patients based on how they respond. Like that
Okay.
one lady that I showed you, the one that I've been working with for 4 years, that we've got decent results on her spondylo. Like the only way hers responds is if I like side posture her as hard as I possibly can, Dr. Quirk.
Yeah.
But the other patients with the spondylos would light up like a Christmas tree if I did that to them. So a lot of them
Right.
with spondylos, I'll do gentle side posture, but a ton of them it's just like basically sacral base with the arthrostim and some prone sacral base drops. So I'll do
Okay.
just a lot of drop
Like
table adjustments.
Like an
Or
S2
sometimes,
kind of with mirror, or just S2?
Yep, exactly. Yeah, with mirror. And then a lot of times what I'll do too is I'll do like kind of like they taught us in school, but like they teach you to push on almost the navel at L4 to push the spondylo back. I don't like that. I have the patient lay on their back, supine. I have them bend their knees, and then I actually contact their ASIS, and I have them do the equivalent of like that McGill curl up. So I almost have them trying to suck their belly button down, and we do like an anterior drop on the ASIS. So you're almost trying to rock the whole pelvis down. And those who are symptomatic love that adjustment. That one works really well. So they're on their back, knees bent, and trying to suck their belly button to their spine. You contact both ASIS, and you're almost trying to rock the pelvis, right? You're trying to like decrease the sacral base angle, basically.
One of the things that, like, for me, like I do a lot of seated lumbar too, and I find if it's stable, they get amazing relief with a seated lumbar type of adjusting with contact in the spinous and moving anterior and rotation too. Would that? Okay, so that would be one part of the protocol too.
Yeah, I haven't used it too much in spondylo patients. I've never even thought of it with them, but I do use that seated lumbar adjustment P to A with a bit of rotation. I love that adjustment.
Okay.
Yeah. But I've not used it with them. But if you're contacting higher up in the spine, if you're not on the spondylo, we'll say why not?
Yeah.
And if they're getting good results, again, with the adjusting, I don't have all the answers, Dr. Ed. I always just think it's like that's where the art comes in. There's the science, but then there's the art of like you have to be an artist with your patients and you have to listen to them and try and figure out what works uniquely and individually with them. I find with spondylos, it's not like a cut formula. You just have to get them on board for long enough that you can make an impact, right? If someone's going to be around for 2 months, I don't think you're going to make an impact. These patients need pretty long-term care.
Yeah, lifetime.
Lifetime, exactly. All right, guys.
Thanks so much, Pascal.
Appreciate it. Love being on here, and we'll catch you guys.